We'll move on now to our next discussion, and we'll be looking at the incidents of collapsed buildings in not only Lagos, of course, across the country, but we'll be looking at Lagos specifically. Now, worried by the rate at which buildings collapse, the Lagos State Building Control Agency, LASBCA, has commenced the demolition of 114 buildings that have been identified as distressed.
Now, the first phase of the demolition exercise will see 57 buildings pulled down across Lagos as approved by the state government. Others will be demolished over time.
We're looking at Lagos specifically. Now, worried by the rate at which buildings collapse, the Lagos State Building Control Agency, LASBCA, has commenced the demolition of 114 buildings that have been identified as distressed.
Memories from a recent building collapse barely 2 years ago remain etched in the memory. But another tragedy has befallen residents of number 3, Master Street, Odunfa. The 4-story building with more than 30 rooms gave way on Tuesday at about 2 p.m. Emergency operations continued Wednesday as officials of the Lagos State Emergency Management Agency, LASEMA, Lagos State Fire Service, the police, and the Lagos Neighborhood Safety Corps worked tirelessly to rescue victims buried under the rubble.
Fortunately, we were able to rescue 15 of the victims alive, while 5 were rescued suspected dead.
We are looking at this building from the rubbles we have seen here. This is definitely an old building that is not strong enough to withstand the weight of what is on it. If you look carefully into the next one after it, it is also another disaster waiting to happen.
I think it's high time stress test is done for some of these buildings to determine their suitability for continued habitation.
Tears, anguish, wailing as corpse after corpse were removed from the debris. Tales of woe followed the avoidable loss of lives and property. Taiwo Morili has lost 2 of her nephews. She blames the mast recently installed on the building for the collapse.
The boy that died, I brought him to Lagos. He has been with me for about 8 years. They didn't tell tenants anything as they brought the mast. We just saw it on the building suddenly. They later said they wanted to install the generator downstairs and the tenant kicked against it.
12-year-old Afolayan Awuraola and her brother survived the collapse. She's still in shock and narrates their near-death experience.
I feel scared. The shock, I can't even explain my feelings. Yesterday we just came to buy beans. So suddenly the house just as in, it's like a miracle. Everything is just dark, if not of my brother. So some people are there shouting for help. My brother saw some way to escape, so he held my hand and drew me out.
Tragic scenes like this one are fast becoming a regular occurrence in Lagos. Residents here say a lot more needs to be done to prevent a reoccurrence.
I'm begging federal government with state government, may they approve them 2-story building, don't allow them to build 3-story building.
Most of the houses in this area are very weak. They should come and check it. They should have mercy on us. When they come to mark buildings, the developer will take money to them. They will then leave the house. Please help us beg the government.
Residents say government needs to do more to regulate the building sector in the state to arrest the disturbing collapse of buildings. Jokeli Jadu, TVC News, Lagos.
Well, joining us on the phone is the National Publicity Secretary of the Building Collapse Prevention Guild, Architect George Akinola. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you, but it is not well for some people who have lost families in this collapsed buildings. It's like every time a building goes down in Lagos, then we talk about it and, you know, everything goes back to normal and we just continue our lives like nothing happened. In this particular case, there was a talk about masts on a building. Who gives a permit for masts to be, you know, erected on buildings?
Well, that's a question for the Ministry of Communications, either federal or local, you know, for permission to erect masts on buildings. But ideally, masts should never be on buildings, especially when you have not done the integrity test, the structural integrity test on such a building. Masts should be on the ground, where structurally they are planted to be able to survive the turbulence of the weather.
All right, Architect Akinola, give us a picture of how bad the situation is right now when it comes to the buildings that are collapsing, buildings that don't have integrity tests. How many really? Because some have been earmarked or marked for demolition. About 57 will be demolished. But shouldn't there be more than this generally? Give us a picture of how bad the situation is. Bad buildings around.
Thank you. Presently, that exercise is being carried out in only a local area, Lagos Island. It's not the whole of Lagos State. So when you hear the number 114 is for Lagos Island, and it's just for just a part of Lagos Island. That's an exercise that on April 8th, when we did a press conference, BCPG did a press conference, we called the attention of the Lagos State government and the governor especially to the dangers that we are facing, and that this kind of exercise should be carried out where integrity tests will be carried out on buildings, and buildings that have failed such structural integrity tests will be quickly pulled down as a proactive, preemptive measure. And we want to thank the Lagos State government that this is the first time that a preemptive exercise is being carried out. You would know that if you not look at the whole of Lagos State, on a daily basis, buildings are being constructed. Many buildings are being constructed without permission. Many buildings are being constructed contravening all the rules and regulations of building construction in Lagos State and in Nigeria as a whole. So as it is, when you now look at the 57 other local governments, apart from the Lagos Island local government, do a small extrapolation, just multiply what you have now by 50. Then you have an idea of the dangers that we are facing all over the whole place. Don't let us forget again that for over 100 years of building activity, many buildings that have been constructed have failed all these rules and regulations too. So you look at all those ones that have failed over the years that have not been checked, and you look at the very slippery terrain of Lagos, where you have waterlogged sites, swampy sites. People don't do soil tests before they do construction. They don't put the right foundations in place. And then the heavy rain. So you look at all this and put together, and you know that we have thousands of buildings that are waiting to just fall down.
All right, your guild is a building collapse prevention guild. Like they say, prevention is better than cure. Now, before a building goes up in Lagos or wherever in the country, what exactly should the builder have in place, to be certified to go ahead to, put up any structure? Give us a picture of it.
By builder, I'm sure you mean the client, the person that wants to put up a structure. Now, a person that wants to put up a structure, the client, should first of all go to the consultants, the professionals that are trained, that have gone to school to learn this particular profession, to learn this particular courses. Now, you have the architects, you have the engineers, you have the builders, you have quantity surveyors and estate valuers and surveyors and planners and surveyors. Now, all these are people that are trained to put up a building. While an architect designs, the structural engineer does his structural work to ensure that the skeleton of that building is proper and sufficient to be able to carry that structure designed by the architect. So, and you must submit all your drawings, both architectural, structural drawings, mechanical and electrical drawings to the town planning authority, especially where buildings are going more than 2 or 3 floors, and then you need mechanical and electrical drawings to accompany them. You must submit to the town planning authorities in whatever state that we are doing the construction. And these professionally prepared drawings are vetted and approved or disapproved by the relevant state authorities before you can be allowed to put up construction. And when you are putting up construction, the Lagos, especially in Lagos State, the Building Control Agency, Lagos State Building Control Agency, LABCA, must be approving every stage of your construction so that we can be sure that you are complying with approval processes. So that we can be sure you are complying with the construction approval that LABCA has given you. Otherwise, when you fail any aspect, any part of this process, you are bound to have collapse. And so, but what most people do is that they just think of a project and they start building without going to see professionals. Or they call these quacks, people who are not trained to do it, or people who are other professionals or they are not in that particular profession. They call them to do building drawings and go for approval. They bribe their way through the processes of approval, or they don't go for approval at all, and then they put up the construction. And the construction that comes as a result of this kind of lopsided, unethical way ends up failing the tests that we are talking about.
All right, but Architect George, let me interrupt you here a little bit. Any building that is being erected anywhere is usually not out of magic. It doesn't happen overnight. Some of the buildings, especially for those who are like 2, 3-story buildings to 4, sometimes take about 6 months, 7 months, 1 year, 2 years. So no one would say they didn't see it. But there are, from the picture you've painted for us now, there are agencies that are supposed to monitor to ensure that there is compliance. Are you saying that all of these agencies are failing, including yours, that have not been able to prevent buildings from collapsing?
Well, let me clarify certain things, please. Our guild is not a government agency. It's a voluntary organization, a collaboration between all the 7 professional institutes: Nigeria Institute of Architects, Nigeria Institute of Building, Nigeria Institute of Town Planning, Nigeria Institute, Nigeria Society of Engineers, and so on and so forth. 7 of us that have come together to put up a preemptive exercise, to put up a preemptive process against building collapse in Nigeria. So we are a voluntary organization doing that to assist the building construction processes in Nigeria. That's by the way. Secondly, the government agencies, they are patently understaffed. There is no way, for example, there was a particular year where we had 48,000 building activities going on simultaneously in Lagos State. 2011 precisely. Now, with only around between 200 and 500 members of staff monitoring sites in Lagos State, how do you intend to cover 48,000 sites? So they are understaffed, and there is no way they can be enough. What we have been advising government all along is to use the professionals who are located all over the local government and the local council development areas all over the state, and either in their offices or in their residential houses. They're in all these neighborhoods. And all these professionals are professionally trained to identify street buildings and even to check buildings under construction. Casually, in the processes of their living or they are working in their offices, they can go by all these sites and see them. So when Lagos State government or any other state government in Nigeria exploits the potential bank of professionals that are available to them to use, they will complement the efforts of the LABCA and the Ministry of Physical Planning to be able to enhance the supervision of building construction. And at the same time, we are advocating at the Nigerian Institute of Architects.
Of course, like you said, we do appreciate the fact that there's inadequacy of staff to actually monitor buildings, as many as 48,000 in a year, like you mentioned earlier. But the fact remains, just like the report by our senior correspondent earlier, that, you know, some of the respondents actually said when a building is marked for demolition, before you know it, the building continues. Which means there is collusion on the part of the people who are expected to ensure that these buildings that lack integrity don't go up in the first place.
That's corruption. And that's corruption. And I think you can call it EFCC to do a check on all that. That's corruption. If a building is marked for demolition and all of a sudden you see it going up again, the demolition mark is rubbed off, that's corruption. Something has happened in between. So, I mean, you know, it should be investigated by the ministry in charge. And I must tell you that town planner, architect Nifuwoshi, who is the Commissioner for Physical Planning in Lagos State, has been doing tremendously, has been performing tremendously. We are very proud of him because he has cooperated with us in so many ways. So if there are corrupt officials in his ministry, he should look into that and weed them out. Because a lot of people are dying. Properties are being lost on a daily basis. Thousands of millions are being lost by individuals and organizations putting up buildings erroneously. So
yes.
Yes, please go on.
Of course, we do hear that with the controlled demolition that Lagos State is planning, that the owners, the builders themselves, the owners actually are supposed to bear the cost. I wonder if you are informed about what happens when they refuse to actually bear the cost of this demolition.
Well, that's I don't know how the Lagos State government intends to collect.
All right, we'll have to leave it there then. Architect George Akinola, National Publicity Secretary, Builders or Building Collapse Prevention Guild. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.